Hmm. So as it sounds like I did, had kind of an instant gut reaction of like, oh no, when you
Yeah,
found out that she had passed. Why did you have that reaction?
I think because definitely for the past 10, 20 years, and then much more so in the past few years, the Supreme Court has become so politicized that, and I think both parties and members of both parties are both guilty of this. I don't know if one is more guilty than the other, but um, they've begun to treat the Supreme Court like it's a political body.
Hmm.
And in its design, it's not meant to be. It is not a political body. It can become politicized, and it can become politicized from within as well. I admit that, because it's made up of human beings. But the whole intention of the Supreme Court has kind of become lost on all sorts of people, including our own elected class.
Hmm. Hmm.
Have forgotten that the court is supposed to be an apolitical institution.
Well, and would you argue that, I mean, honestly, not just the Supreme Court, but the legal system in general is supposed to be an apolitical institution. People are supposed to be held like they're supposed to be treated equally under the law. It shouldn't really be as something that politics even enters into. Am I right?
Yeah, I think that the sort of view of the American system as it's supposed to be is that you have degrees of difference between the left and right, but the place people are supposed to be able to come together are on constitutional matters, and the judiciary are meant to be the guardians of our Constitution,
Hmm.
and that means it's supposed to be beyond politics, just as the Constitution is beyond politics, or is supposed to be. But we increasingly over the decades have gotten two major political parties who, in different ways, only like certain parts of the Constitution. I think
Hmm.
both parties have done this, and because of that, we that's been part of the politicization of the Constitution and therefore the court.
Hmm. Jack Posobiec did a live stream on Periscope yesterday where he was talking about how he was talking about John Adams. And one of the things John Adams did before he became one of our founding fathers was he defended the soldiers that fired the shots in the Boston Massacre, the British soldiers. And this was
Exactly.
incredibly controversial because obviously that was a highly emotional moment. Everyone wanted to see them basically get the death penalty. And John Adams stepped in and he said, these men deserve a defense, and not just like a half-hearted defense, like a full defense. And he ended up getting, I believe, most of them off in the
Yeah,
course of that,
yeah.
right?
I think all but one were charged, and even that one charge was lessened from what it had been. Is my understanding in
Yeah.
terms of the conviction. Yeah, John Adams is a very important figure for that reason, and he's a good example of the revolution itself, because his cousin Samuel Adams was such a radical that he was more of a "you're on my side or you're my enemy" kind of figure. Whereas John Adams, when he decided to turn and become a supporter of the revolution, it legitimized it because people had known how uh, how ethically centered he was, including in the example of him defending the British soldiers of the Boston Massacre. It proved that he had thought through this process. He had really considered the situation before becoming a radicalized revolutionary. And it's that sort of temperament that we're needing right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when would you say that the Supreme Court started to become politicized in the course of our history?
Oh, um, at least as early as 1803.
Oh wow. So it's been a while.
Yeah. Well, so Marbury v. Madison is the decision where the court kind of underscored its position as being the arbitrator of what is and what is not constitutional. And there's a lot of debate over whether they had the power to do that. Part of my work right now is laying out the evidence that actually it was already judicial review, as it's called, was already well established even before that decision. Um, but that was a political battle as well as a legal battle, because President Thomas Jefferson, who was on the other side of that debate at the time, was very much against that idea. And there was a politicization because Thomas Jefferson came in as arguably the first sort of populist president. We forget today that Thomas Jefferson was the most pro-democracy of the founding fathers. And when he won the presidency in 1800, him and his Republican Party, different Republican Party from today,
yes,
actually a forerunner of the current Democratic Party, so it gets confusing. But Thomas Jefferson and his party swept the election of 1800. And by doing that, they created a much more democratic country. In response, people on the other side who were not necessarily anti-democratic, but were concerned that popular majorities were going to go too far with their power, started to exercise their positions, including John Marshall at the Supreme Court, and saying, like, look, popular majorities are good when they're sensible, but it's not as though we can't have checks against popular majorities. And so that was a really important case for legal history, but also it could be where politics began to get involved, because that decision was a reaction to sort of the popular moment of Jeffersonianism at the time. Mm-hmm. Now, the court has had much more controversial decisions over the years, and we can talk about that. But the politics involved goes back almost to the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's like a comforting. I kind of almost feel like that's a comforting thought.
Yeah,
because
it kind of is. Yeah.
Sometimes it's easy to feel, especially with how crazy our world is right now, that this is like the ultra most crazy it's ever been, and it's so extreme. But when you start to put it in context, we can see patterns of this stuff happening throughout history, right?
Yeah, well, you can also use that election of 1800 as another example. We are incredibly divided right now, and I don't want to dismiss that. That's very real. But in the election of 1800, which was the sitting president John Adams versus the opponent Thomas Jefferson, who was also the vice president at the time, because that's how it worked back then, their speeches and their writings, and especially the newspapers that backed each one, because their media was as partisan then as ours is now. The pro-Adams papers accused Jefferson of that if Jefferson won, he would promote rape and incest to the Republic, that he was a pro-rape and incest figure.
So it wasn't extreme at all.
Yeah, not extreme at all. And the Jefferson papers accused John Adams of being a hermaphrodite. So
I love history.
Yeah, so these political divisions and the mudslinging go all the way back.